Hello everyone and welcome to Ships and Stuff here on the Gunpla network. As always, I'm the Spicer and today we'll be venturing outside the world of Gundam to sail the high seas of Zipang. That's right, we'll be looking at the DDG 182 Mirai from the anime and manga series Zipang. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that this video is brought to you by none other than Side 7 Exports. Your one-stop shop for all things premium and exclusive. Side 7 stocks a variety of merch, not just kits. From Gundam-based exclusive products to BP Bandai model kits, they'll likely have any of those hard-to-find grails for your collection. When you're placing your next order, don't forget to use the promo code Gunpla Network 10 to save 10% off. Once again, that is Gunpla Network 10 for 10% off. Zipang follows the JMSDF, or the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force Mirai, an Aegis defense system equipped missile destroyer of the Japanese Navy equivalent. The Maritime Self-Defense Force kind of acts as their Navy. We'll talk about it more in a minute. But the ship and her crew get whisked back to 1942 while steaming to join a joint exercise with the United States Navy by Hawaii. Being placed in the middle of the Pacific theater of World War II, the Mirai and her crew must balance not affecting history while balancing the morality of leaving their countrymen behind, even if those countrymen are fighting for a very different Japan. The DDG 182, or the DDH 182, depending on what variation you look at, Mirai is a Yukonami-class guided missile destroyer, an improvement over the real-world Kongo class, a Japanese derivative of the U.S. Arleigh Burke-class missile destroyer. While the JSDF would go on to update the Kongo class to the Otago class in real life, in the fictional world of Zipang they would move on to the Yukonami class. This upgrade would add a hangar for helicopters and rotary-winged aircraft by adding 10 meters to the overall length of the existing Kongo class. In total, her length comes out to 171 meters, or 561 feet. For comparison, that puts her right in between the size of the Imperial Japanese Navy of World War II's destroyers, light and medium cruisers. In some instances, the smaller heavy cruisers as well, but generally between the destroyers and cruisers. She's a little bit bigger than the destroyers, a little bit smaller than most of the cruisers at least. The Mirai would house an anti-submarine Sikorsky SH-60J Seahawk helicopter and an MVS-32J Seagull reconnaissance rotary-winged aircraft. While the SH-60J is a real-life helicopter used by the JMSDF and other variants used by other branches of the Japanese Self-Defense Force, the MVS-A32J is purely fictional and resembles a smaller reconnaissance-focused V-22 Osprey, which the JSDF also uses, as well as the United States and I believe a few other countries as well. The Mirai would be one of 4 Yukonami-class destroyers, all of which are equipped with the Aegis missile defense system, a complex system of sensors allowing the ship to detect any incoming threats above or below the waves. As far as we see in the anime, it works pretty similarly to how it works in real life. You have several different radar arrays to detect a variety of different over-the-horizon missiles, things like that. You also have sonar in a couple of different areas that provide pretty much any kind of anti-submarine detection, which is why the Arleigh Burke, the Kongo, and then the Yukonami class would usually be filled in roles of anti-submarine. Sometimes they would also be anti-missile defense or anti-air. Variety of loadouts of missiles that we'll talk about in a minute can change that, but generally speaking, these are pretty much designed to defend a carrier strike group against pretty much any kind of incoming threat. At least be the first line of defense on the outer rim, sometimes stationed in the middle depending on the actual layout of the fleet or the strike group in this instance. The Mirai would sport a host of weapon systems, primarily being defensive in nature, due to the JSDF's defensive posture as a result of Japan's constitution. You see, Article 9 of Japan's constitution bars the country from maintaining a military. However, it does allow for a purely defensive force that we've now come to know as the JSDF, or the Japanese Self-Defense Force. Technically, the Constitution disallows them from fielding any military of an offensive nature, meaning they cannot invade or undergo any imperialistic ambitions, anything of that nature, which, oddly enough, kind of comes to a head here in 2022 as their territorial claims off the northernmost island chain off of Hokkaido between the Russian Federation and Japan. Now, of course, with Article 9, Japan really can't do anything about that, even if they wanted to. Even though they claim it's their territory, it's a whole big political thing. They couldn't really go in and do anything about it, but it is there as kind of a stopgap. Oddly enough, after World War II, after Japan was pretty much demilitarized, the U.S. was kind of the one to float the idea of, hey, could you remilitarize because we need more allies in this region of the world? And, you're looking at kind of the Korean War spinning up in the few years after World War II. It's maybe the decade after if you really kind of count it that way. But tensions were already rising with the Soviet Union pretty much immediately. So they were like, hey, can you do that? And Japan was like, nah, not really, fam. We're not feeling it. And it's been a big debate in Japanese culture for the since the end of World War II. It's been pretty much ongoing in a variety of measures. It's important, and I went on this rant for a very specific reason. The Arleigh Burke class, which the Congo class, to an extent the Economic class is based off of, is known to actually house several of purely offensive weapons, such as the Tomahawk cruise missiles and the anti-ship harpoon missile. The JSDF, or the JMSDF ships, would not field these as they have no defensive nature. Now, there's a weird gray area with anti-submarine stuff that we'll talk about in a minute, but generally, none of these ships field these missiles, at least that we, the public, know of. However, in Zipang, they do use an anti-ship version of the Tomahawk, which is kind of weird because you would probably use the harpoon. I mean, I guess technically a cruise missile would maybe net you more range, but it'd also be a high-flying missile, which doesn't really do a whole lot. Typically, your anti-ship missiles will fly a lot closer to the surface of the water versus a cruise missile, but a cruise missile in some instances will have longer range depending on a variety of factors. But generally speaking, Tomahawk cruise missiles are meant as standoff weapons to fire from a vast distance, usually at land targets. So, weird that they use that. Could just be writer oversight, or it could be a alternative universe where Japan has changed Article 9 of the Constitution, which is why the Mirai is going to an exercise with the U.S. Navy. Maybe they're testing out the capabilities for a slightly more offensive, capable ship. They don't say that in the show, it's just something I kind of thought up while I was watching the show and looking at this, so kind of take that as you will with a grain of salt. Now, in terms of actual weapons outside of the mythical Japanese anti-ship Tomahawk missile, the Mirai is armed with a variety of missiles, such as the RIM-66 or the RIM-66 Standard Missile 1 and 2, commonly known as the SM-1 or SM-2. These are usually your medium to long-range defensive missiles for anti-air. They can also be used for anti-ship missiles and anti-cruise missile kind of operations. You have the RIM-7, the Sea Sparrow, which is kind of your closer range missile. Same situation, anti-aircraft, anti-missile. And then you have the RUM-139 vertical launched anti-sub rocket. This is purely anti-submarine stuff is kind of weird because much like anti-ship, you would use it to defend yourself, but it's not actually stopping like a torpedo or anything. It's actually attacking the other combatant. So it's a weird situation, but it's, I guess, kind of defensive in nature depending on how you use it. Now, this array of missiles provides the Mirai with quite a bit of defensive capability out to about 100 nautical miles, and kind of as you run through like the SM-1 and SM-2, you get to the Sea Sparrow, which is a little bit closer in, and then the anti-sub rockets have a slightly different range and are meant for different purposes. But generally speaking, your anti-air and anti-submarine, you're covered for a good bit. Along with those missiles, however, the Mirai would also sport a 5-inch or 127mm deck gun for close range engagements, that can be used for a variety of purposes as well, but deck guns on most modern ships just are kind of a backup in case you need them type of situation versus a main piece of equipment. As the last line of defense for the Mirai, though, she has two 20mm Phalanx CIWS systems. Now, for our Gundam fans out there, you absolutely have seen the word, or the, I guess, phrase, the title of CIWS, or Close-In Weapon System. This is usually what, like, seed suits get. It's pretty much just for air defense, incoming missiles for very close range. And that's kind of what it is. There's one on the front and back of the ship. And they pretty much kind of spin around to where they have coverage of the entirety 360 of the ship. Lastly, for anti-submarine operations purely, she would have Mark 46 torpedoes as well. Once again, skirting the line of defensive and offensive, but it exists nonetheless. Now, normally this is where I would talk about the Mirai service record, but Zipang gets almost ignored in every conversation I've ever had about any kind of, like, vaguely military anime. So I'm not going to actually tell you because that's what the story is. Go watch it. It's hard to find, I will give you that. It's hard to find in both anime and manga, but if you can find it, it's well worth a watch. It's not terribly long, and it's pretty good. It's a little older, it's from the mid-2000s, but the CGI holds up fairly well. And it is pretty cool to see, like, actual naval combat in an anime that's not Azure Lane. So yeah, be sure to check that out. If you've enjoyed this video, you will absolutely enjoy it, so try to find it. You may have to find a physical copy, but regardless, it is still very enjoyable. And I wanted to make this video, not just to bring attention to Zipang, but as a transition to a slightly different series of videos we'll be doing fairly soon, and let this serve kind of as a teaser to set up something pretty big. I've been the Spicer here for the Gunpla Network. As always, friends, stay safe and keep on building.